Welcome to We the People, brought to you by concerned citizens of the Fort Wayne 912 group. We are here today to discuss Common Core. It's a new educational mandate brought to us by the federal government. And we have on our panel Bill Wilcuts, Dawn Kazmierzak, and Joy Pullman. So without further ado, we'd like to get to discussing this because there's a lot to say today. For a little bit of background, let's talk about the purpose of education before we talk about what is Common Core. What is education supposed to be about, Bill?
Well, the original intent by our founders, if you read through, there's a great book, The 5,000-Year Leap by Cleon Skousen. That book talks about the original intent by our founders was that education to the public was to do two things, teach two things. Teach politics and morality. And the reason for that was that they knew that a free society could not remain free if they were ignorant. However, the problem is that's all changed. The purpose in that also can be really expanded upon, because part of the problem was that when we had slavery in this country, it was illegal to educate a slave because an ignorant person is easier to control. So that's why the founders felt that it was so necessary that everybody understood how politics worked, and that a free society needed to be just and moral.
Yeah, that's really curious considering the age that young people left formal education in the pioneer days. When you think about educating them about politics.
Nowadays, we're really concerned about, people getting a job when they get out of high school. So we hear all about education as workforce development, like it's some training program, a 13-year, 12-year training program for somebody to be able to get a job. But the curious thing is, there's lots of curious things, is that when you educate someone to be a citizen, the job preparation kind of comes along with that really well and naturally, making a person able to think, to communicate, to function in the world, to compare different ideas and really be a fully participating human being in their society, as opposed to kind of a drone on an assembly line who's just given, basic tasks that he or she is able to complete. The whole, even though people are nervous about public education or are nervous about being able to get a job when young people graduate, I think it's funny that when you focus on only job skills, technical abilities, and workforce preparation, then you lose both the citizenship and the broad-based workforce preparation that comes from a more classical education.
And leaving out the values, you really leave out the ability to have liberty. Liberty is different than freedom. Freedom is a status, or like a kingdom or a serfdom, but liberty really requires the ability to discriminate right from wrong, to have a moral basis by which you judge things, and by which you exhibit self-restraint in order to have self-government. So if we leave out, it's part of what you say, a little inquiry that I have with many educators and many principals. And I say, where are we teaching local self-government? Is your school teaching that? Do you teach about how the local city council works or the local township? And they say, no. And I said, oh, it's all just about the big federal government? And they said, oh, no, it's not even that anymore. It's all about the big global government. We don't even deal too much with America anymore. And this is what's happened, is that we really have citizens that do not know or appreciate what Thomas Jefferson had said. Even though he was a Virginian, he actually pointed to those northern states and saying they have got it with these small local townships where it is really the local people that were really parishioners from a congregation that administered that self-government. And we've really lost sight of that.
So what's the history of Common Core? Is this something new? Where does it come from?
Well, Common Core is partly new and partly a continuation of a really long train of educational quote-unquote reforms for the past, several decades. So basically, just for people to understand, Common Core is what they call education standards. So it lays out what children should be able to do and able to test accurately in K to 12, in English and in math. So Common Core started in 2008, 2009. People who want nationalized education, national education standards and testing have, for several years tried to get it, but they were not successful trying to get it through Congress in the early 2000s with Goals 2000. The Congress shut down that attempt, 99-0. They voted entirely against national education standards. So according to the Brookings Institution, there's a paper they put out that says, well, so that was didn't work very well. So the folks who wanted that kind of system instead decided, well, we have to make it look like states and localities are doing this because Americans don't like the federal government telling them what to do in their local schools. So they did just that. So 2 organizations called the National Governors Association and the Chief Council of State School Officers, they have nice titles, but they're nonprofits that are basically lobbying organizations. They're privately controlled Washington, D.C. organizations that get a significant amount of their funds from the federal government. So they got together and they basically assembled a bunch of consultants in 2008 and 2009 to write what became Common Core. So if you look on their websites, you'll see, and when they talk to people about Common Core, they'll say, we had input from teachers, we had input from State Department of Education officials, professors, and so on and so forth. And on their official list of people who contributed to Common Core, there's 135 people. 1 in 60 of which is an actual classroom teacher. But I actually talked with several of the people who was on that list of 135 people as contributing to Common Core to write up what they thought kids should be able to know in every grade. And they told me that they had no power over what went onto the standards. They submitted their suggestions to the 5 lead writers of Common Core, but they never received back, oh yes, we listened to this, oh we thought this was a good idea, this was a bad idea. They just kind of sent it off into the ether, and the 5 people who wrote Common Core decided what went on. That was the same thing with the public comment period. They had a public comment period where people could say, look, this is what I think about the draft that you put out. But never did they publish any of those comments publicly, which is standard for a government agency to do in public comment periods. And they never responded to any of them publicly, which is also standard. So we have no idea really what the conversations were about Common Core while it's being created. So those 5 folks that had control over Common Core, they're consultants. Only two of them had never written education standards before, and none of them had ever been a K-12 classroom teacher. So they were hired by the organization kind of coordinating Common Core for the NGA and CCSSO it's called Achieve. And so that was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which has funded national standards attempts and outreach to governors and parent-teacher associations and teachers unions and so forth for about the past decade. They poured $163 million into getting people to like Common Core and to create it. So anyway, so all these people, these 5 people, wrote Common Core, and so Common Core came out on June 2nd, 2010, which was after 2 deadlines that the federal government had given states for adopting Common Core in exchange for federal grant money. So a great number of states had said, look, we'll do this thing that nobody has ever seen. We'll trade our state standards and tests for national standards and tests, but we don't even know what they say. They had committed that, signed a contract with the federal government, but then they made good on their contract in the months following June 2nd, 2010, with most states signing on within 32 business days of them being released, largely in rubber stamp, approvals through whenever the next meeting of their state boards of education were. And so then basically the next thing in Common Core is states and teachers are gearing up in the classrooms to do it. And national federally funded Common Core tests come out in the 2014-2015 school year.
Is it true that some of the states, though, have opted not to go along with this?
Yes, and Indiana is kind of one of them. There are a number of states who really, because Common Core was done behind closed doors and not subject to open records laws, open meetings laws that would apply to a state board of education when they do that sort of thing. People found out about it only after states had done it. When it started being rolled out in their schools, when their child was bringing home new math homework, they said, "Wow, what's this? Why is this changing?" And so in the past year, you've seen 16 states have said, we want to reconsider this. They've taken some legislation. State Board of Education has reconsidered. In Indiana, we're right in the middle of a pause. It basically says, we'll stop the implementation at grades K2, where it was this last school year, while the state legislature holds hearings, or the State Board of Education holds hearings, public hearings around the state. The state legislature does a cost analysis on completely reorienting our education system, and then the State Board of Education will reconvene and redecide about whether to continue on the path we're on.
But aren't some schools doing more than kindergarten and second grade? So can you speak to that a little bit? So actually,
well, the law, right now the law is that Common Core, should be restrained to K2, grades K, kindergarten, first and second grade. But a number of schools in Indiana are, that I've heard from, friends around the state, is that they're just continuing with Common Core. They expect the State Board of Education to, again, say, yes, we're going to do this, and they're rolling it out into the upper grades despite the law.
Is there anybody along the way from the conception of it to implementing it in Indiana who is a child developmental specialist who's looked at how this might affect children? Is there anybody that was on the curriculum that has this title?
Well, actually, I looked at all the people on the list of the 135 who helped contribute to Common Core. Not one of them came from Indiana.
Oh, well.
And what about these assessment tests? What about doing? Are there more tests now? And what schools have to do those? What schools are having to do? Voucher schools have to do those as well to get their accreditation? And
yes, in Indiana, private schools that want to be accredited and voucher schools that want to accept students using a voucher have to use state tests, which in 2014, 2015 are slated to be those Common Core national tests.
So how exactly is the process of education with Common Core? Any different from what you and I grew up with?
Yeah, actually it is. If you want to get into some specifics, we can take a look at a couple of slides that I have of some math problems just to give you a real concrete example. If we can switch over to the slides, your standard algorithm that you typically will see is going to show a simple math problem, 83 times 27. The way we see it done is that we multiply 7 times 3 and we get 21, carry the 2. 7 times 8, 56, add the 2 and you get 58. Next we bring down our 0. 2 times 3 is 6, 2 times 8 is 16, and then we add the two numbers together for our answer of 2241. Now, Common Core, what they want to do is, or what the standards call for, are multiple methods of solving the same problem, getting the same answer. And it's really kind of scripted. So you take 83 times 27 again, and this is called partial product. So they take 80 times 20, 1600. 80 times 7 is 560. 3 times 20 is 60. 3 times 7 is 21. Then we add them together and we still get 2241. Now the thing I'd like to point out or ask you is, how did you get 80 times 20?
new math.
80 times 20. No, use a standard algorithm again. Look, 0 times 0 times 0 times 8, 1600. Add it together, you get 1600. Because, I'm sorry, but as a third grader, I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, 80 times 20 is 1600. I need to go back and use the standard algorithm that we've all learned over the years. If you've learned it at all. If you've learned it at all, but otherwise I'm going to be raising my hand because I'm not going to be using a calculator either. You know, the point of learning mathematics and basic fundamental math is that you can do these things on your own. And then, you know, obviously you use a calculator later on. Now, if we can go back to the slide again, this next method is really strange. This one's going to make your head explode, okay? And I started to work through this and try to figure out how it worked. I overlooked one important step, and that was that I didn't take any mind-altering drugs before I started working through the problem.
Now, what grade is this?
Well, this is, I don't know what grade this would be taught in, but this is two-digit multiplication.
Students are supposed to be fluent in multiplication by 5th and 6th grade.
Okay, there you go. So basically, this would be like something you'd probably start working on in 4th or 5th grade, maybe 3rd grade. But, you know, 3rd grade, I think you do basic multiplication tables. So let's go through this next example. Here we have 83 by 27, and then they're going to have on your homework this grid-like form. Okay, so what you do is you go 2 times 3 is 6. And you have to put the 0 up there because there's nothing in the 10 slot. That represents the 10 slot. So then you go 2 times 8, which is 16. Then you go 7 times 3, which is 21. 7 times 8 again is 56. Now the diagonal lines represent the 1s, 10s, and so forth. Okay, so then what you do is you take under the number 8 there, you add everything in that diagonal. So you get the 1 out there on the side. Then you go under the 3 and move down diagonally across the page. So you got 6 plus 5, which is 11. Then you got the next diagonal. Add those up, you get 14, and then finally you get 1. Now this is even better. Gets better. You have 1, 11, 14, and 1. You take those 4 numbers that you wrote down on the left and the bottom. Then each comma writes the 1s, 10s, 100s, thousands, right to left. Not left to right, but right to left. And you reduce to single digits by carrying the 1 from each from each space there. Okay, so what we do is we take we take the 14 and we carry the 1 to the next spot, so 11 becomes 12, and you're left with 4. Then the next one is you take the 1 from the 12 and add it to...
No wonder the Soviet...
Yeah, so like I said, after
Oh
I
my
took some
goodness.
mind-altering drugs, I was able to do this math problem. So you end up with the 2, 2, 4, 1, and then you just take out your commas, and you have your 2241 as your answer.
It's really hard for me to believe this is faster than the old method.
Or
Well,
that a small, you know, a 9, 10-year-old child is going to be able to remember all of these steps, you know,
Yeah.
able and get them.
And even
Well,
the,
yeah, and
the
draw
diagonal.
the grid. Now let
Some
me
of them
show
have
you
trouble with
something else.
diagonal.
Now when you get good at math, I think usually your teacher would challenge you and say, well, let's do a really big number. Okay, so let's take a larger number. Okay, so 6,283, 4627. Multiply those out with the standard algorithm. There's what you get. Now let's put that in the lattice one. Now I didn't even finish this because I didn't have time. So, I mean, you want to talk about a headache and needing aspirin. This is the best, I don't know, either a cure for insomnia or just self-induced confusion.
Well, this speaks also to why homeschoolers had thought for a while, well, we'll just do the math the regular way and we'll take the SAT and the ACT and the Stanford 10 and we'll just come up with the right answer. But this is a key because they're going to be testing these steps in between.
Yes.
And so it's not that you can come up with the right answer and still get the right answer on your test. You have to literally come up with this process of how they're really training people to do it. I've talked to many high school students, and they're frustrated now, some of them, at having to show their work because some of this is being introduced in some of the areas. And they know how to get the answer, but they can't write it down the way you just tried to do it either.
Yeah.
And so they're being counted as wrong. And it's really, I think Joy had mentioned this to me too, it's really affecting the attitude that some children, especially boys, have about education. It's very frustrating for them. So
It's I mean, no. If you if you have a good math student or you're in upper level math, nobody objects to exploring lots of ways to understand numbers and think about them. But throwing really difficult conceptual problems at at a young person who is trying to just master the basics so they can get to the concepts really ensures that they'll never get up to the higher level of math and keeps them floundering because it's developmentally inappropriate to teach a small child concepts and higher level mathematical reasoning until they actually know how to do the basic steps of math.
And you can see what it's going to do for their impression of who they are as their capabilities. I must be stupid because I don't get how to do this.
Or
so
I must be stupid because Mommy and Daddy can't help me.
yeah, well, that too.
So
And
must
so-
they
and
be
so-
really
stupid?
stupid.
So,
Or there's
so
something
again,
wrong with my parents.
there's something wrong with my parents. They really don't know what to do. And there must be something wrong with me because I'm just not good at this, so I don't think I'm going to like math. I think I'm just going to check out on math altogether and I'll do something else.
And it's funny that independent reviews of Indiana's standards before Common Core found that their math standards were fewer, clearer, and higher than Common Core. So, they made more sense to teachers and students. They, were not so many that teachers couldn't teach them all in a single year, which is a common complaint about state standards. So they were actually really better math standards that Indiana had, some of the best in the country. And then Common Core came along, and Indiana's teachers and Indiana's students now have to adjust to a poorer, method of learning mathematics.
Which is really bad. How does this relate to how children are actually learning? What kind of tools, what kind of resources do they have? Is everything in books like we used to have, and then the teacher stands up in front of the classroom and teaches like we used to have, or are things going differently in the 21st century?
Well, I can kind of address that because there's another issue that I took some interest in about a year ago, and that was the one-on-one computing model. There's been some local school systems in the area that have adopted this. Now, what that means is that every student gets a laptop. Okay, that's the whole concept.
Or an iPad.
Or an iPad or some device. Pretty much no more books is the direction that would take us. Now, there's a couple problems there. And one thing that I found in a proposal for one of our local school systems was that in the proposal it stated that the purpose of one-on-one computing, or one of the purposes, was to remove the teacher from the teaching role and turn them into a facilitator. So the idea would be, if you could imagine a classroom, 30 kids, and they're all sitting in front of laptop computers, and the teacher just walks around the classroom checking to make sure they're all on and that they're all working, and that's it. There's no critical thinking. They're just being I mean, essentially programmed by the computer.
What grade level is this beginning?
This would be all grade levels.
All grade levels.
It would be all. Now, implementation and stuff is usually a gradual thing over time.
They're anticipating doing this with kindergartners?
Kindergartners already have iPads in Wells County.
Yeah.
I mean, children are given iPads with access to the internet, which they say will be blocked.
It tends to be restricted.
But it takes time for those to catch on. Another thing that's happening is there's being unvetted curriculums. Teachers are writing their own curriculums, and so those are not published, but those are just put on a website, and they download those. That's happening already as well. And while they may be very good teachers, some of them may not be some of the ideologies that you would want your child to be having, or the methods that might be being introduced. So there's a lot of oversight that is not happening. And so you have your child here in the Fort Wayne area, they log on to the My Big Campus site where they then get a screen. It has links to other sites to go to, and you and I know how easy it is to change something on a website.
Well, and with Common Core, back to the technology part, we just had the I-STEP tests in Indiana, and it was a disaster because the systems, the computers could not handle the volume, the workload that they had to put out to service all of the students that were taking the test. Now, my background is in computers. I've done support and tech support, network administration and things, and I actually worked in a local school system. So I've been right there when schools are trying to adopt computer methods of teaching, and it's hard because it is so difficult to keep the computers up and running all the time. I mean, if my pencil breaks, I run over, sharpen, and I'm back to work. If my computer breaks, I got to take it down to the technician, if you have one in your building. And a lot of times you don't, because when you start adding computers to your normal functioning building, lights, everything else, you have to maintain them. And plus, the other thing that people don't consider in education usually is the continued changes and upgrades. As software changes, you have to buy new hardware. As you buy a new operating system, Windows or the Macintosh OS or whatever, you sometimes have to upgrade the software programs that you've been using for 8 to 10 years.
And who tends to benefit from those upgrades?
The very people that are actually funding Common Core.
Yes, those same people funding
Mr.
Common
Gates
Core.
himself.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
One thing that Joy talked about was the adoption, and one thing she touched on was the evaluation of the standards themselves in comparison to Indiana's existing standards. The Fordham Institute rate standards. That's just one of the things they do. Now, they do receive funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the report that the Fordham Institute put out, when Indiana State Board of Education voted to adopt Common Core, that report was never presented to the board.
Who showed up for that meeting?
There were a number of folks involved.
I thought they said that only one of the Indiana Board of Education members was actually there at the meeting when they made that decision.
Sure, I would actually have to
That
look.
doesn't sound correct
I don't
according to
think
the
so.
meeting minutes that I've read.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember the
I
exact
think someone
number.
had mentioned that.
Yeah.
But do I understand correctly that as this program gets fully implemented, you'll have textbooks being phased out and normal classroom procedures are being phased out in favor of the children being almost totally on the computer? Is this accurate?
That's not required in the Common Core standards, but that's kind of a trend that's happening in conjunction with Common Core. And Common Core actually makes that a lot easier because you can pull and grab things from other states now. So you can it's kind of copy and paste education. Oh, look, this teacher is doing this. So that could either be a really great synergy or that could be, really great, wow, again, cut and paste education. We'll just let somebody else provide the content and I'll be the facilitator. One thing I wanted to mention as Bill was talking is that the teacher as the facilitator idea has been, the progressive idea of education. It's been in American schools for a long time. And that's just something, again, that, technology continues to remove the teacher from the classroom.
Bill, did you have another example of the curriculum you want to show us?
Yeah, I
Language
did.
arts?
This kind of goes into the, we were talking a little bit about, I made the comment that maybe there's something wrong with my parents. Now, this is really interesting because if we take a look at this next slide, we see an example, and apparently there are multiple examples of this throughout the standards and some of the curriculums that are being developed to meet those standards. Basically, what this is doing is, it seems kind of strange and kind of hokey pokey, but it's there, and everybody can judge for themselves what this says to a parent. Are you invoking emotion against parents? So if we take a look at this slide, here's a simple fill-in-the-blank sentence example. my mother blank me to clean my room. Okay, now your choices are, the student's choices are asks or nags. The correct answer, can anybody guess?
From Common Core.
Nags.
Common Core
Yeah.
is nags. Now, if that's not teaching me that my mom is in the wrong, I don't know what else is.
Kind of disrespectful.
And it goes
Extremely.
along with talking about the teacher being the facilitator and having the student just basically hook into something else to learn, which that's a different trend than really what elementary education was designed to be, since most elementary children don't quite have the skills to know the criteria, what is right and what is wrong. So now we're removing the person who's supposed to be their mediator, their advocate, helping them,
mentor.
their mentor, and we're just putting them right through the car wash with no car and no umbrella. We're just going to let all the stimulus come upon you and just see what happens.
We have so much to cover. I'm so glad we have another chance to get together and finish what we haven't been able to get finished today. So stay tuned, audience. Next week you'll see us again. We the People will be presenting part 2 of Common Core. If you have a chance to come to one of the places in Fort Wayne in the near future that is discussing Common Core, you'll find some really good guest speakers. Bill, can you tell us what's coming up in July?
Yeah, what we've been doing is putting together and scheduling some facilities around town where we're going to be presenting this information, probably in more detail. We'll have more time, so we'll get more in depth on it. On July 13th and July 24th, there will be 2 presentations. They'll both be on Common Core. On the 13th, it'll be at the DuPont Library branch, and on the 24th, it'll be at the Aboit branch. If you go to the website, fortwayne912.com, we'll put up an entire schedule over the next 3 months of Common Core presentations, and we're also going to be doing some movie nights of some fantastic films and documentaries that really get into some of the foundational principles of our country, what's been going on, how it's been happening. So I definitely would encourage people to go to the website, fortwayne912.com, and take a look at that schedule and see
Good.
if you can make it.
Thank you. And Dawn, I think, real quick, tell
Real
me
quick.
about the
August
August 3.
3rd, 10 a.m. to 12 noon, we're going to have Joy Pullman with the Heartland Institute as well as Senator Cruz, and that will be at First Assembly of God in Fort Wayne, and that's on 1400 West Washington Center. Large facility, so bring everybody you can think of to bring, because
There's so much to learn about Common Core. And our children are a precious resource. They are precious to us and to God. We must do everything we can to educate ourselves to protect them. So I would urge everyone to come out to these meetings so that you can pass the word. Common Core has a lot of things in it that we should be afraid of. You'll find out more information in our next session together. So hope you can join us soon. Thank you for being with us.